I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.
Hello horror hounds, welcome to my horror house. Today's film is The Abominable Dr Phibes, starring the legendary Vincent Price. There are two things you need to know about this film. It's called The Abominable Dr Phibes and it stars Vincent Price. Those are the only two bits of information you need to help you decide whether or not this is the kind of movie that you want to see. It is exactly the kind of movie that you imagine when you're told it's a film called The Abominable Dr Phibes starring Vincent Price. You'll already know whether you're going to make a hard pass or say, 1 ticket please. 9 killed her, 9 shall die, 8 have died, soon to be 9, 9 eternities of doom. If that sort of histrionic purple dialogue doesn't do it for you, don't even press play, dude. After his wife dies on the operating table, Dr. Anton Phibes concocts an elaborate revenge plan to murder the team of attending doctors based on the 10 plagues of Egypt. I mean, what a fucking pitch! Although it does take its fair old time before we learn that this is what is happening. There's no dialogue for the first 10 minutes of the film, and Price doesn't speak for the first half hour. Before this little nugget of plot drops, we get storytelling which seems to be tailor-made to illustrate the word quirky. We open with an old theatre organ ascending into shot on a riser, with Phibes bashing away at the keyboard, eliciting thoughts of the Phantom of the Opera. This is over the opening credits, mind. We're in a very stagey Art Deco surrounding, and Phibes' beautiful silent assistant Valnavia enters the shot and winds up the good doctor's Clockwork Band, a life-size quartet of automata called Dr Phibes' Clockwork Wizards, who take over the musical duties. Then Phibes and Valnavia start ballroom dancing and exit the shot together. At this point, mere minutes into the film, barely past the opening credits, my partner declared, "This is probably the weirdest opening to a film I've ever watched." The Abominable Dr Phibes was directed by Robert Fuest, who worked as a set designer on the British TV series The Avengers, and I think you can follow the quintessentially British thread of darkly ironic humour from shows like The Avengers or Jason King all the way through to Phibes. Add more than a touch of our theatrical pantomime tradition and stir in a dollop of the French Grand Guignol and voila, you have Dr Phibes. Anton Phibes exists in his own plane of existence, achieving the kind of primary colour heightened reality of an Adam West Batman villain. He comes complete with a gaudy Art Deco villain's lair and such an extravagant modus operandi that I am flummoxed as to why he appears to have had a very limited life beyond these two movies. He is exactly the kind of figure I would expect to pop up in Alan Moore's League of Extraordinary Gentlemen comics or Kim Newman's Anno Dracula book series. Perhaps Phibes' existence outside the films is down to an inherent difficulty in recreating or capturing the pitch-perfect magic of Vincent Price's performance. I think Anton Phibes may well be Price's greatest ever performance. It's both typically Pricean whilst stripping away all of the tools usually associated with a Vincent Price performance, the man's face and the man's voice. You see, Phibes was horrifically burned and injured from a car crash while rushing to be at his dying wife's side. He has no face to speak of and a mechanically recreated voice generated by plugging his voice box into a gramophone. So we have the wonderful sight of Price made up to look as if his own face is an immobile mask covering Phibes' true face, leaving so much to be communicated through Price's piercing blue eyes, sorrow and loss, grief, burning hatred, and the zeal and mania of a madman. And when Phibes talks plugged into his steampunk vocoder, He can't move his lips, but he works his throat and his Adam's apple for all they're worth to show that the man's larynx is being put to work. All his dialogue then was recorded separately to his physical performance. The great Vincent Price voice then, probably the most famous voice in all of horror cinema, is pulled apart and reconstructed into a strange staccato remix of the voice we know. In the round, it's a performance built from mask work, mime, and the reconstruction of elements which would normally constitute a typical Vincent Price performance. The word most often used to describe Price is camp, and I've rejected this every time I've had occasion to discuss one of Vincent Price's performances. And Price always walks the line. He always draws the horror crowd into a film or project, makes them feel welcome. There's something of the arch and knowing about many of his turns, but only ever affected to let the audience know that he understands the unwritten contract between the horror crowd and those telling the horror story. Everyone is here to have fun. The normies might not understand this kind of fun. They might think we're weird for enjoying horror movies. But when we get together, we understand and the crowd revels in it. And Price is the welcoming host of every party he puts on. And the Abominable Dr Phibes fair revels in its preposterous story, featuring its preposterous antagonist. And Price is precisely the right actor to traverse the high wire between the absurd and the horrifying. I can think of no other actor with the deftness of touch and lightness of play to carry off such a task, to highlight the ridiculousness of it all whilst celebrating it and selling it. Truly, Phibes is the high concept serial killer to rule them all. Hannibal Lecter would no doubt give all due deference, and John Doe from Seven is nothing but a Phibes fanboy. Heck, Phibes even saves the last curse of Egypt for himself 24 years before John Doe sets himself as the final victim of the last deadly sin on his list. Some of the deaths in Phibes are hokey, to be sure, but this isn't The Last House on the Left, and it's not trying to be. And to be fair, the deaths representing the curses of blood and locusts are flat out magnificent. The sight of Terry Thomas's entire blood supply on the mantelpiece in 8 jars brings to mind poor Father Dyer's demise in Exorcist 3, and clearly the Gemini killer was a scholar of Phibes as well. And since we're discussing the horror legacy of the Abominable Dr Phibes, I can't walk past the death of the firstborn scenario at the end of the movie. The most fabulous culmination of Phibes' revenge plan pits his wife's surgeon against the skills that were unable to save her. With his own son now on the operating table, he has but 6 minutes to remove a key placed close to his son's heart to enable him to free him before a vat of acid melts the kid's face. It's well known that this portion of Phibes was a strong influence on the first Saw movie. But looking at the garishly coloured theatre stage-like Art Deco design of the film, I can't help but also see a kernel of Dario Argento's Suspiria here in Phibes. And certainly Phibes' plan to avenge himself on a medical team he feels is culpable of murder finds an echo in Argento's grisly and underrated Trauma. All this and the end credits play out with a rendition of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. I mean, honestly, what's not to love? And I haven't even talked about the mysterious assistant, Volnavia, so we're just going to have to leave her for next week and the inevitable sequel, Dr. Phibes Rises Again.